Well, thank you so much, Jason, and thanks to all of you for joining today. I really do appreciate it, and I'm really tickled and honored and flattered that the Post sort of spun off this webinar series. And so what I'd like to do is maybe over the next 20 minutes or so, I want to just hopefully kick off this great series with why I think it's so important to get beyond best practices and really shake up our marketing strategies from time to time. I know some of you may be tweeting and or live blogging this, and of course I'd love to stay in touch with you beyond today's webinar. The way I use Twitter is, of course, to learn and really just keep in touch with everything that's going on the outside of the industry and really just continue my learning process, which is something I'll touch on a little bit later today. And please feel free to reach out to me if there are any questions, or certainly just to connect beyond today. So to kick things off, and this is going to show my age here, when I was a kid, Evel Knievel, he was the biggest daredevil out there. Watching him jump buses and cars and whatnot was just simply incredible. He was the guy who set the standard, and even today I imagine that most of you, despite your age, you know who he is. But maybe the way you know who he is because when he failed, he tended to fail rather spectacularly. I mean, in one jump at Caesar's Palace, which you're looking at here in Las Vegas, he landed short, and in this example, he suffered a crushed pelvis, a femur, fractures to his hip, wrist, both ankles, and a concussion that kept him in a coma for almost a month. So the next time we're worried about whether that new marketing campaign might or might not work, we might just ask ourselves, what's the worst that's going to be able to happen? So for kids like me, and even today, Evel Knievel, he represented the daredevil that we all wanted to be. I mean, he was fearless, and as he said, you know, bones heal, pain is temporary, and definitely the chicks dig the scars. But he was crazy, and he was a daredevil, and he pushed the limits, but was he successful? Well, just real quick, consider that a successful Major League Baseball player today's got about a 30% success rate in batting. I mean, the highest average as of today, this at least, is Josh Hamilton over the Texas Rangers, and he's got a little over 34%. And an NFL pro quarterback, let's say Drew Brees of the Super Bowl winning New Orleans Saints, his passing percentage, meaning how many of his passes were actually caught, was 70.6%. I mean, that's an outstanding record. So over his career, Evel Knievel had about 300 or so jumps, 276 of which were successful. That's about a 92% conversion rate for success. So he not only created a sport where he pressed the limits, he was incredibly successful at it. And in 1975, I was one of those kids that watched on TV as he successfully jumped 14 Greyhound buses. I mean, it was this amazing jump because even though he didn't quite make it, he landed on the safety deck of the 14th bus. It got him the record, the distance record for jumping, and at that point it was the record for jumping the most buses, which, I mean, basically he set the standard for that. And that was a record, by the way, that would hold for about 25 years. So now flash forward 23 years later, 1998, and there's this guy named Bubba Blackwell, right? And he breaks the world's record of Evel Knievel when he jumps 20 cars. And that was one more than Evel Knievel did back in the 70s.
Who?
And then what's that?
I said who?
Oh, yeah, exactly, right? Who's Bubba Blackwell? And then 1 year later, 1999, he ties Evel Knievel's world record when he jumps 14 buses. So some say he beat it because, you know, since Evel's tired, actually hit that 14th bus and all of that. But so it's amazing, right? Except, you know, as Jason said, who the heck is Bubba Blackwell? And then I'm sure all of you were all over this news. In March of this year, Seth Enslow, you know, Crazy Seth, right? He goes to Sydney Harbor in Australia, and he broke the world record again. And this time, as the headline said, he smashed the record by going 183 feet, 16% difference. Huge, right? And the event was called Seth versus Death, and the marketing folks were all over it, and they were trying to hype it up. But basically, as I'm sure you've all guessed now, most of the world just hasn't really cared that much. I mean, it's been one great big yawn. So what's the lesson here? Well, to me, first of all, it inspires me to live life a little more daring. I mean, maybe not quite so daring that I'm going to break a femur bone if I don't succeed, but at least some of the time I want to try extraordinary things. At least some of the time, if I'm going to fail, I want to fail spectacularly because I tried something extraordinary. And the other lesson I get from Evel Knievel is that you can be the one to change the rules and set new standards, or you can be the one to incrementally break a record. And most of the time, quite honestly, the one to establish that record, the one that sets the standard, that's the guy who gets remembered. And so let's be clear, right? We're marketing people. and we're mostly focused on digital. So we struggle to explain to our moms what we do, much less expect ABC Wide World of Sports to televise either our triumphant victory or our agony of defeat. But what we do remember is what it does for our business. It's like jumping 14 buses when those outliers, when we really move that business forward. And we've been witnessing it literally over the last few months with the Old Spice campaign, and literally over the last few years with the Blend Tech Will It Blend content marketing campaign. And then we also see the spectacular failures as well, the ones that don't quite hit the ramp, right? When Motrin decides to launch a campaign to encourage women to use babies as a fashion accessory, that fails spectacularly. Or when Microsoft decides to put out a content piece for Explorer 8 and has a woman literally vomit in the piece. And by the way, if you haven't seen it yet, there's a new video clearly meant to go viral from this company called Casemate. They make a shield that goes over the iPhone screen. The video is called Living with Steel Wool Hands and How I Lost My Nipple. Let's just say that the title pays off, and it's quite disturbing. So I got to figure it's going to be one of those case studies that goes down in history. So anyway, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about our standards as marketers, the best practices that we live by. And there are tons of them, right? We hear them every day. I mean, for those of you of any age, you might remember the 40-40-20 rule of direct marketing. That was the one started years ago by a guy named Ed Mayer, who was a pioneer and a legend, actually, in the direct marketing industry, meaning the direct mail industry, where we used to get postcards and stuff in our mailbox. And what he said was that we should focus 80% of our effort on the right audience, the right offer, and 20% on the creative and the execution. And there are creative directors all over the world cringing at that right now. But it got its name from his rule of focusing on 40% on the right list or audience, 40% on the offer, and 20% to everything else, and that included the creative or the paper and the envelopes and all that kind of stuff. And there's more recent ones, right? Like you should remove navigation from landing pages. And I see this one a lot. It appears in so many landing page 101 seminars that you might see online, or so many online landing page quote-unquote gurus that will tell you to remove the landing page. But I can tell you from experience that this rule, the answer to it is it depends. I've tested both in different client situations with different types of clients, and I've personally seen the situations where the landing page with navigation, everything else being the same, gets a 10% left in conversions. And speaking of conversions, there's maybe the most famous all of best practices or rules out there, and that's that 2%. Yeah, go ahead.
Before I'd like to talk about this one for a second.
Sure.
Because it's of particular interest to me. I actually posted something similar in the LinkedIn group recently. Especially in B2B, if you look at your bounce rate on your landing pages, and by that, how many people click through on an ad that you paid for and then just leave. It's horrific how much waste there is there. And there are tools out there, like Demandbase, that can help you sort of capture some information about those anonymous visitors. But the point is, think about what you're offering, and especially if it's something like a free trial, which is like, going in for, that deep kiss within the first 5 minutes of a date. It just doesn't really make sense for a lot of people. It's a tremendous commitment, and they need to learn a little bit more about you before they just sign up for a free trial. Do you have any information for them about that free trial that they can use to learn a little bit more before asking for their commitment? I think it's a pretty significant question in B2B, and so many landing pages and even so many home pages, just leave me wanting more.
It's a great point. One of the things that I've also seen is that, there's another best practice as it pertains to landing pages that I've seen so often, which is, you should only have one link on there, one way for them to get out, and it'll optimize your conversion rates. And I think you're touching on something really important, which is, if 2% convert on that one link, 98% of them aren't. And is it better to have them do something else, right? So as you say, so buy now or request a demo or do something now or learn more, right? So have a secondary call to action. And all of this, of course, is about testing and looking at that testing, which we'll touch on in just a second, of course, but testing and getting the insight from that and really learning over time how it's going to improve our process. So just going on here, looking at that 2%. So for those of you old enough to remember that direct mail piece, we used to use that 2% conversion rate as the standard. That was our standard in print stuff. And then it got transferred when we started looking at more of the direct marketing online and with PPC in particular. And guess what? When we set our sights on a goal like 2%, we're probably going to hit it. And if you do a Google search on the average conversion rate, what you'll get is a whole bunch of articles, of course, as you might expect. And by the way, within 2 searches, I found these 2 quotes from quote-unquote marketing gurus who are basically telling you that 2% is all you're going to be able to ever do. You know, and it's almost become a law now, this rule that it's the best that we can do. 2% means we're doing a good job, and anything beyond 5% or 6% means that we're rock stars. But take a look at this chart here. So what if the bottom conversion rate was ours, measured against our competitors? So as you can see here, the stellar performance, the rock star performance we're doing at 8%, it's dwarfed by our top 9 competitors who are all averaging above 10%, and some as high as 45%. I mean, half of the visitors to their site actually buy something. Okay, but that's just an illustration, right? Well, wrong. Every one of these except the 8% number is a real number from real companies. So let's go look at another version of this chart with real names. So these are the top 10 conversion rates at the beginning of this year measured as unique visitors to unique visitors that actually made an online purchase. And just so you don't think it's companies with like 2 visitors or something, basically this list, in order to make it, they had to have at least 500,000 visitors a month. So that means that almost half of everyone that goes to the online grocery store Schwann's is making a purchase. Almost 1 out of every 4 visitors to PetMeds.com makes a purchase. Now, is that because they've got some incredible offer? Maybe. Is it because they're attracting the right customer? Almost certainly. And is it because they're not shooting for or happy with a 2% best practices conversion rate? Absolutely, definitely.
Is it a B2B versus B2C kind of situation here, Robert, or what's the story there?
You know, I don't believe so. I mean, certainly there are differences, and there are marked differences between B2C and B2B and how we market and what those calls to action are going to be, and whether it's e-commerce or whether it's something more substantive like an enterprise software sale or something like that. So all of those are going to come into play here, and as we're going to learn a little bit later, this is really about your business and what you're doing. But at the end of the day, I think anytime we're shooting for an industry average, whether it's 2% or 4% or whatever it is, you know, that's the part where we're actually only shooting for, you know, just to run right down the middle of the road of mediocrity. You know, we're only trying to be a little bit better than our competitors or a little bit better than our predecessor was. And that's the real trouble here. So it's unique to us, but of course there are differences in whether it's a B2B or a B2C marketing. So let's switch gears again, and let's look at email click-through rates. So what's the industry average, or what we're shooting for with email click-through rates? So again, you do a search or you ask most email experts, and what you'll get is, if you're a B2B marketer, you know, maybe 5%, or on the really high end, 15%, or on B2C side, maybe it's like 2%, or maybe up to 10% or so. So why not half? Why shouldn't we be converting half of all the emails that we send out into a click-through to our landing page or our marketing message? Well, that's what Publishers Clearinghouse asked, and they reformulated their entire email send program, managed the data, cleaned it up, got it segmented, made sure relevant information was going out to the right person, and now according to a case study on Marketing Profs, they're consistently getting about 40% click-through on email. That's a percent of total volume, not just opens. So now let's look at what are the lessons from all of that.
You know, Robert, just looking at that email, that kind of punctures some thinking about another best practice about use of images. I mean, that whole thing is an image.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, actually, I should be clear that the screenshot that you're looking at there is taken from a landing page, not actually the email itself. I didn't sign up for the Publishers Clearinghouse email.
It's okay, Robert. You don't need to subscribe to win. It's okay.
That's a good point. That's actually a really good point. So the lesson is, of course, as we just mentioned, is you're unique. Your business is unique, and you as a marketer are unique. And we need to continually be looking at what works for our business. Because if we shoot for the average, guess what? We're going to actually achieve it. Specific to conversion rates, by the way, and this touches on what Jason was getting at a little earlier, is that one of my original inspirations was the guys at the Future Now blog, specifically the Grok.com stuff, Eisenberg Brothers, and they've got a wonderful blog. And really, they talk a lot about this, about how looking at website conversion rates or conversion metrics is basically, you've got to look at your unique product or service, look at it in context with what you're doing and what your competitors are doing, and what conversation is it you're trying to achieve. But then once you've got all of that, once you've tuned all of that, once you've segmented and you've done all of the best practices work to start up, what can we do to shake things up? See, here's really the thing. This isn't just unique to conversion rates or email click-through rates or page views. It's about our entire marketing strategy. How do we sometimes hamper our success by striving for best practices so that we set ourselves up on a course for mediocrity and we don't swing for the fences? And most importantly, how do we implement a process that allows us to try setting the standard? In short, how do we know how, when, and how many buses to put in front of our motorcycle? So let's talk about that for a couple of seconds. So unlike Evel Knievel, we don't typically get to know the marketer who's the patient zero for a best practice. But certainly best practices, they don't start out as best practices. Somewhere out there, there's a marketer who discovered that by removing 75% of her email list into a double or triple opt-in list, segmenting it into specific content targets, and focusing on creating a superior subscriber experience, that's going to exponentially increase her marketing performance. But then these best practices become the rule. They become decisions that get passed on and ultimately become the only goal we shoot for. And if we follow best practices to the T, we can count on being just as good as our predecessor or maybe just as good as that competition. Now, to be clear, I want to make sure that I'm clear here. I always advise clients to start at best practices. I mean, there are obviously good and wonderful things that we've learned as marketers that are going to help us stay within the bounds of rational performance. You know, bringing it back to Evel, for example, best practices tell him he's got to have his motorcycle in great shape, he's got to have the ramp at a specific angle, he's got to wear a helmet, he's got to wear a leather jumpsuit so that he doesn't, tear off all his skin. But knowing these things is what gives us our foundation, our rule book. And now that we have our book of rules, or our finely tuned engine, that's when we can now break the rules. And that's the key, to start and don't end at best practices. So how do we set up a creative process for this? Well, I think there's two main philosophies that we've got to get in place to set up that creative process. And the first is that we've got to have permission to fail. And I talk about this a lot, but it's really true. If you're using web analytics or dashboard reports to prove a point, then we're just setting ourselves up for failure. I mean, what happens over time is that we get so myopic on making sure that that graph continually goes up and to the right that we start living in fear of there being any deviation from it. So instead, if you can, reset expectations around different metrics. Find the metrics that your team needs in order to determine the success of a marketing, and even more generally, whether that's number of sales, or if you're a publisher, maybe it's page views, or maybe it's total revenue by customer, something that's going to indicate that both the marketing and the sales goals are aligned on the same thing. I mean, sure, report on web traffic and conversion rates and specific tactics and other campaign metrics, but reset those expectations if you can, that these are likely to fluctuate wildly, or at least wildly, as you experiment with new things. Or separate them completely. Can you make a marketing skunkworks initiative, where you can even have a separate budget for that is separate from the other metrics, where you can experiment wildly with new and creative ideas, trying to set those new standards. And then as you experiment, you've got to treat that like a process. You've got to have the ability to blow some stuff up occasionally. And if you're blowing stuff up, you've got to be trying some interesting things, some of which might be off the core strategy here and there. And I'll talk more about that in just a second, but a quick idea here is just take, for example, your worst performing tactic. Maybe it's print or physical events or something like that, and ask yourself, if tomorrow this tactic was the only thing I could use to market my service, how would we do it? Or two, take your best performing tactic and ask yourself, if tomorrow we learned that compared to all our competitors we were dead last in performance, what would we do differently to change that? And now how about for every other thing that we're doing? So for example, let's say you've got a landing page and it's converting healthy best practice 2 or 3%. Why not try an experiment where we completely change the design of that page, or launch a microsite that where you approach your product in a whole new way? You may fail spectacularly, or you may just create a breakthrough new best practice. Or three, pretend for a minute that your target's customer, their industry bubble just burst. Maybe it's newspapers or financial services or something like that. How would you fundamentally change your solution, your messaging, your packaging, whatever those things are, to address another industry's economics? And would addressing that now give you a competitive advantage? And I'm sure you can dream up, a million others. What you're going to end up with is a whole bunch of big, scary marketing ideas, and some of these are worth experimenting with. And I'm sure we're going to get into more specifics later in the webinar, but in the time that I've got left, what I want to do is just quickly touch on one other topic that I wanted to cover, which is this idea of how we get innovative or create these new breakthrough ideas with the pressure of real time. All too often when I visit with clients, there's this real and or perceived pressure to get results fast. You know, we just don't have the time to be super creative because we've got to push the ball forward. We've got to push results fast. So I sort of boil this down to a question, which is, are you moving fast or is fast moving you? And this was earlier this year, Harvard did a study with The Economist magazine, and they looked at 350 businesses. And what they did was they split these businesses into two groups. And the first were businesses that took a strategy of breakneck speed. I mean, they basically said, go as fast as you possibly can. And then the second were companies that made a conscious decision to slow down in order to check in that they were on the right track. And as you can see, because the slide's up there, you can guess which one actually performed better. The ones that actually slowed down actually achieved a 40% higher sales rate and a 52% better profit. So I think this really applies to marketing strategy as well. So we need to ask ourselves as marketers, if we're moving too fast, are we skipping details? Are we relying on metrics that really don't mean anything? And are we really skipping over the details of a narrative that we're trying to create here? So when fast is moving you, you're not performing as well as when you're moving strategically fast. The Harvard study found that there are 3 elements that you can focus on, and what I've done is just adapt them to be very marketing department specific. And the first is reviewing your work, of course, metrics and measurement. So when fast is moving you, you're looking at those numbers and you note the results and you're using them to rate or prove a success in kind of an execute, measure, repeat cycle. You're not using those numbers to draw creative insight and make actionable plans. So when you're really moving fast, strategically fast, you really review, and I mean really review the numbers. Metrics and KPIs, they're much more than just pass-fail. Slowing down and really reviewing the results from your experiments develops into the learning and insight that you can use to improve results over time. And that usually means that what you're going to have to do is reduce the amount of things that you review. As I've said to so many clients, have the capability to measure everything and then don't. And this goes way beyond just seeing which landing pages convert at a higher rate, but asking yourself, what does that really mean? Now, it might mean simply that, and you can certainly just move on from there, but perhaps we want to dig just a bit deeper and ask why. Was it different traffic patterns? Why does that particular hero image resonate more with buyers? What effect might that have on other parts of our content? Where can we reuse that? Where might we apply that learning across all the content on our online strategy? So trying new things and experimenting. So when fast is moving you, ask yourself if you've got the ability to try new things and technologies, and if that's solely predicated on how we can lower costs and become more efficient. So when you're moving fast, our ability to try new things, new technologies, new experiments, that's what defines our success. In other words, if you're using technology or new ideas and processes as a way to decrease costs, that's a great way to run right down the middle of mediocrity road. Or if you let fear of the results make your decisions for you, that new thing is a total waste of time. Just 2 quick examples here. When I started using Demandbase as an experiment, it wasn't because I was trying to save more money. It was because I was getting lists, I was getting names, I was getting leads from my inside sales guys in a great way, but I wanted to try and break things up. I wanted to try something new that would really shake it up and really start to do new things. It wasn't because I was trying to save money. It was because I was trying to set a new standard for what we could deliver in terms of quality. Another example on the other side of that is I know a company that recently, they put up an A/B testing landing page. And with the low level of traffic, they really needed about a month to get any statistical relevance there. But after a week, when the test landing page results hadn't surpassed, it wasn't that they failed, that they hadn't surpassed the original. They called it a failure, immediately pulled it. And so if you immediately pull that test down after a week because you think it's producing less results, you might think you're acting fast, but actually fast is moving you. And the last is what I like to say, dance to what the kids are dancing to. So when fast is moving you, sometimes we get so focused on fine-tuning our offers, our landing pages, our metrics, our PPC campaigns, our social media strategy, that we're just continually attracting the same kind of customer. Moving that needle up by 1 or by 2 or 2.5, we simply just don't have time for outside training or learning for our team because we're so focused and quote-unquote moving so fast. I mean, how many times is our marketing department saying to ourselves in one way or another, we're just moving too fast to see what the rest of the world is doing. We're really, really focused on our own internal processes. But when you're moving strategically fast, we set aside a certain percentage of time for out-of-the-box innovation. Any team member, it might be somebody from product, it might be somebody from engineering, it might be somebody from the receptionist desk, anybody can have a great idea for something to contribute. And we've got to constantly be looking at what's going on externally to our business, our competition, our industry. New learning and training are critical. And I know this one can seem obvious, but it's so critically important. And I myself, I slip all the time on this, and I've watched so many companies slide into these patterns. It's so very easy to get wrapped up in our daily grind of our processes and, quite frankly, our success that we never stop to poke holes in what we're doing. Even when we're successful, we should stop and ask ourselves what we can do to shake things up. In the end, of course, all of this, whether it's setting new standards or breaking old habits, it's all about leadership. And whether you're at the top or report up to the top, three things need to be fostered in order to be a fast and break best practices and be innovative. And that's permission to get it right, not getting it quickly, permission to fail, and getting an allowance in that budget for failures, and a focus on innovation and a commitment to excellence over the speed. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Jason and just leave you with two quotes from Drucker and Einstein. So Drucker says that business only has two functions, marketing and innovation, and where marketing innovation creates value, all the rest are cost. And so I believe that following marketing's best practices is certainly a way to avoid failure and maybe succeed moderately. But to quote Albert Einstein, try not to be a man of success, but rather a man of value. And with that, I'd love to take questions and talk more about this. And Jason, back to you.